Oh, this is great. So this is the, I was wondering if there was going to be lights dimmed or something.
Thank
All right.
you, Emma.
That feels more lecture-y. I got this right. So a little while ago, I was asked to do a lecture on my work in myth, and so I thought that I would share that with you all tonight, as opposed to just sort of going straight through my work. So there's things in here that are my work, and there's things in here that aren't my work, and hopefully at the end you'll see kind of a fuller context for the paintings. So these two images here are on the, I'll always get this wrong, on the left-hand side is Sun Ra's space. This is still from Sun Ra's, the space. Space is the place. Thanks. Thank you. I wanted to say that backwards. Place is the space. Anyway, and on the right-hand side is a romantic painting, early 19th century painting of the origins of painting, or it's an image of the myth of the origin of painting. So I wanted to. The reason why I'm bringing these two things up is. In my work, I'm sort of weaving a story, more or less, that brings in the notion of an idea of black people, black bodies as myths, but also talking about a kind of survival as a painter, you know, as a maker. And so I wanted to share a little bit about these two stories. So let's start with the origins of painting. And the earliest text, one of the earliest art history texts, is called A Natural History by a writer named Pliny. And so his story of the origin of painting starts with a maiden from Corinth, which is this woman you're seeing in the left-hand image on the right. And she's in this moment, the origins of painting start in this moment where she finds out that her lover is going to be leaving and going to war. And what this ultimately means, in a sense, is that he's not coming back. In a sense, it's almost like there's an understanding that he won't come back. And her response, which is the origin of painting, is to not sort of despair or cry. And in a sense, she's in this kind of middle place somewhere between a desire to sort of maybe grasp or her lover, but also experiencing a great deal of loss. So this place somehow between desire and loss is giving her this sort of response, and the response that she has is to trace his shadow on the wall. And so this becomes supposedly the origins of painting, which I think is a pretty wonderful story. What I think is interesting about that story in relationship to painting is sort of what it might mean for what painting is or can be. And so for me, it maybe speaks of painting coming out of this sort of very in-between place, or between two extremes, and painting being a sort of response, as opposed to a sort of simulation of the world around us. Those are very different sort of ideas, and those have been argued with this whole myth. And on the left-hand side, Space is the Place. Sun Ra is a jazz musician. From the 50s throughout the 70s, making very experimental music, very experimental jazz, and sort of a real character who was sort of at at the heart of his music, he was searching for something he called the altered destiny, which is an alternative reality for Black people, particularly globally, but particularly responding to the United States at the time. And the notion that there would be this space and place where Black people could exist and live free without the problems that we have here. No white people. It's like this kind of beautiful black paradise in space. And so he's this kind of crazy character. He made this movie. So this is a real, very full spectrum of an artist. He's making this music. He's building a mythology and living it. So he made this movie, which tries to sort of explain this situation. So we see Sun Ra here in the middle and wearing these kind of crazy, almost ridiculous costumes with Egyptian gods. I wanted to, he says something in the film, or there's a moment in the film which I thought was really interesting, which it connects to the notion of myth. There's this moment where he walks into, he's in Oakland, the Oakland area, and he's in this sort of youth center, and there's pictures of Kathleen Cleaver and Angela Davis, Aldous Cleaver, and the kids are, they're like rapping and kind of doing kid stuff for like, I don't know, the 70s, and he walks in, in all this garb, and they're like, "Hey man, are you for real?" Because it's, and his response really sort of stops them in their tracks, and he says, "How do you know I'm real?" And he says, "I'm not real. I'm just like you. You don't exist in this society. If you did, your people wouldn't be seeking equal rights. You're not real. If you were, you'd have some status among the nations of this world. So we're both myths. I do not come to you as a reality, I come to you as a myth, because that's what Black people are, myths." So these two things have had this sort of big influence on my thinking about sort of making a narrative, a figurative narrative painting, and the possibilities of sort of building off of that. So I think I did this right. Great, okay. So this is one of my paintings, and this painting is called Rhombus. And I'm very bad at saying, sometimes saying sizes and medium and all that. So if I didn't or miss it and you want to know, just yell at me. So this is roughly about 6 feet by 6 feet askew. This is a shaped painting. So this actual wood panel that's shaped in this rhombus form. And this is sort of a sort of bather scene. I wanted to talk maybe a little bit about this the notion of painting sort of being somewhere between desire and loss and cleaning, but also the kind of in between this. And I think for me, there's this way in which the Black body throughout history has always contended with this notion of being somewhere between nature and a contemporary existence, between the type of primitivism, and it's kind of sort of pervasive throughout American culture. So like even like wearing my hair natural is like a thing, and meaning more authentic, right, or more something blacker, and so I'm interested in that sort of space in between this kind of sort of contemporary existence and this and this sort of notion of a natural or authentic presence. So this narrative basically, which is very loose, is based on a kind of European bather scenes, and so these women are sort of surviving in these more or less idyllic landscapes in which they make abstract paintings for ritual. They use them as masks. They use them to build houses with. They hunt. They go through a lot of different sort of survival scenes. So in the paintings, I'll go to the next slide. I'll go back and tell you details of the other one as well. So in this painting, you know, they're obviously sort of building a shelter. So for me, for the word abstraction or abstract painting, inside the narrative of the painting is a sort of is both physical and metaphysical in a sense. It's both a catalyst for spirituality and it's building material. It's really a story about sort of making and building a world around oneself. And I tend to be focused on stories of the matriarch throughout history. And so I'm going to bring more of that into, as we go along, to sort of flesh that out a little bit more. I wanted to go back to this slide, which is called Hunter-Gatherer. And this is 24 by 24. It's a smaller-ish painting, and of this sort of scene in which, you know, this boar is being sort of skinned or dressed, field dressed. And in the paintings, you sort of see these borders, and these borders sort of. This one is less of a border, but I am trying to use that black sort of border as a sort of border. And sometimes figures fall into the picture and into the scene, or there are things going on within and around the border of these paintings. I'll go back here to this painting, which is called The Thirsty Laborer. And just for a quick view, I'll go back for a quick view to just see the scale of this. This is an image of it sort of installed in the gallery space at MoCA Cleveland. And so it's a really large painting, about 1/8 each, 118 by 118 by 137 at the longest part of the triangle. And this is a bit of a close-up, so you can kind of see what's going on there, this sort of building, and this sort of water maiden. And so the water maiden sort of being taken over by this woman who is sprouted branches. So within this world, this conversation between nature and humans are kind of always in toil, and they're always sort of toiling with this sort of very contemporary art practice of abstract painting. And so in the border, I was going to talk a little bit more about the border. So the borders on these paintings are of sort of velour material. So they're flocked, which means that they're very plushy borders. And I like the notion of shaping the panel and shaping the viewer's sight, in other words, making the viewer highly conscious of their position, really delineating that this is some other place, or this is the notion of some other place. And so you are not there, you are here. And so, in a sense, you find yourself at this threshold, this in-between place, which I think is, where for me, where a painting starts to sort of become sort of alive, within the viewer's mind. And I'm going to move very fast to some things that I'm working on in the studio, and so this is not chronological. I really don't like chronological order. But you'll see why in the end. It'll all make sense. So these are things that I'm sort of toiling with in my studio at the moment. and thinking more about this notion of a kind of more metaphysical connection of abstraction, of geometry, of color, of light, in relationship to this group. So literally on the left, this figure is moving through this sort of black hole diagram, and sort of being extruded and coming out as a kind of color being on the other end. And the slides aren't the greatest because I just took snapshots of my studios. And on the right-hand side, maybe this sort of precursor to the left. In other words, the notion of the color and the geometry being sort of at the biological level as well. These are really small paintings, about 12 by 12. And of course, the point of origin here is the Vitruvian Man, Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. And in a lot of ways, with these paintings, I'm thinking about history. I'm thinking about deep histories. I'm thinking about who gets to represent those things. And so there's lots of contradictions in the work, and there's lots of humor, but there's also a lot of seriousness. And so, in a sense, there's a kind of uncomfortableness, both in, I think, probably for a viewer, but also in making these things, and I kind of like sort of creating that kind of question, as opposed to sort of making a sort of demand on the viewer, or asserting a sort of answer to the viewer about anything. But I'm more interested in how these things can spark questions. And so the Vitruvian sort of perfect proportions, this place where geometry and the figure kind of meet in this kind of beautiful way, sort of gets kind of deconstructed or exploded out in these little paintings. And these are very, 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 very recent. So, the one thing that this slide doesn't show is the physicality of the skeleton, which is die cut and sort of collaged onto the surface of this sort of skeletal anatomy. And there's still questions for these paintings as they sit in my studio. The general idea is that these are about 36 by 72. It's about human height, about my height, and they represent each season. So this is summer, and this is spring. And so the idea is that I'm going to go through the seasons, and maybe a little bit more at that format. And in the borders of these things, you'll see all kinds of sort of hidden detritus. A lot of times it's outdated technology or trash. This kind of, I'm thinking about this kind of in between, like sort of borderland, where you kind of slowly maybe go into some type of utopia, but you have to kind of go through this kind of sort of I don't know, residue of maybe the past, or a kind of or the environment. Sometimes there's like big gulps, or plastic bags, things that actually happen in the natural environment. So I wanted to get to this kind of deeper into this notion of myth and what kind of structures these paintings. And that the largest thing I would say is there are these two figures here, which on the left-hand side is Diana, who's Demeter in the Greek version, between Greek and Roman mythology. And Diana is sort of this, presides in the woods and presides over hunting and chastity and childbirth and a lot of really heavy stuff, you know, really big things. And she has this sort of, I don't know, the general story of that comes up with Diana is the notion of is the story of Diana and Actaeon, and Actaeon sort of comes into the woods hunting and comes upon Diana, and is turned into a stag upon seeing this kind of, you know, immortal being. Again, return the question of sort of in the face of this immortal being returned back to nature. And then on the right-hand side, the right-hand side is Mami Wata. This is a kind of famous image of Mami Wata throughout Africa, throughout the Caribbean. And the funny thing about it is it comes from a Samoan kind of carnival image. So go figure. But Mami Wata can be any type of, it is plural, it could be any type of water deity. And also with this residing within lakes, residing within nature and having sort of powers, both good and bad, fortune and misfortune, turned on a dime. And here's some other things. The lecture, which I forgot to say, the lecture, by the way, that I gave on myth was called "I Got All My Sisters With Me." So I should have told you that from the beginning, but now it'll make more sense. So again, there's this Diana scene here on the on my left, and it's hard to see in this picture, but over there in the on the, I would say the right-hand side of the picture, there's this little guy peeking. This is in Villa Borghese. If anybody's ever been to Rome, this painting's in Villa Borghese. There's this little guy peeking through the woods there, and looking dead at the viewer. And on the right-hand side, this picture comes from southeastern Nigeria, and is there Efik? And as I understand it, they are sort of indoctrinating a priest or having a ceremony that is honoring any number of water deity. So there's ways in which there are these cultural sort of structures that sort of rhyme and sort of have and relate and go back and forth. Again, this is these both are, you know, this sort of Orientalist, European Orientalist sort of harem fantasy, and I forgot this other guy, Bugaro. And you know, my question was always, well, what are these people? You know, what are these women doing in the woods? Because you go to the museum and you see they're all over the place, and maybe it's very, you know, it's bourgeois porn from the 18th to 19th century. Some of it is about, you know, mythology, but this sort of there's this long history of this, and it rhymes again, you know, in the 19th century, early 20th century with bather scenes and such. So the question I asked, well, what could happen in this space where you know, how can a counter narrative happen in this space? This is a picture of the Arsenberg's house from 1927, I believe. And these were huge collectors in New York. And what I found interesting about this photo is how integrated, you know, these pieces of artworks were. In other words, at the early part of the 20th century, the notion of well, the notion of being primitive in say, art, or European art was like a good thing. You know, the more primitive, you know, somehow the better the painting was. And this is how people would live with work, you know, work that are objects from Africa, from the Orient, and with these sort of European contemporary paintings, everything sort of lived together. And we kind of live in, I think, a moment where there's things, maybe that's changing, but anyway, I've come up in a world in which these things get separated out, and maybe way too much for me, you know. And so I like to collide these things back together. So I also do these digital prints. And as a painter, I'm a little, I kind of stray here and there. I'll stray and do a video, I'll stray and do some digital work. But it always comes sort of back to painting, even little sculpture. Almost reluctant to say that, but but I always come back to painting. But I like building images and thinking and making images in ways that sort of present some sort of question. So these are, I was thinking about, you know, this narrative that I'm dealing with and what it might mean to have an ancestral figure for this group. And it would bring together this, you know, it would bring together this sort of African ancestry, female African ancestry, and this sort of contemporary art practice that they happen to be having out in the middle of the woods. So you know, and also this image of the universe. This is a Hubble deep field image. So those are all little galaxies and little worlds and not stars. And so the notion that could be like a condenser, so that, you know, bringing these three images together, for me is like a kind of the sort of deep field image sort of puts these two things very intimately together, whereas in reality they might seem very far apart. But for me, in my world, they exist very close together. So this is just a shot to see, so that you can see the maybe sort of general scale of these things. And so we going on down the rabbit hole. What I'm trying to do is sort of show you this sort of history that's out, that's sort of in front of us, and how, I guess, in relationship to my work, how I'm kind of pulling that in. So, you know, this whole conversation of the primitive, or the notions, you know, notions of beauty, notions between a kind of European and African existence have existed throughout the art. So that's Man Ray on the left-hand side, Kiki with African mask, and of course the Picasso on the right, Demoiselle d'Avignon. For me, I have a lot of questions for these paintings. Well, what are the questions, or what are the questions that these artists were asking? And I don't think that art history provides a very interesting response to that. So far, I think they were actually asking way more interesting questions about, you know, the relationship of the kind of colliding of cultures and desire, and, you know, really much more social questions, I would say, than just the reorganization of space. And if it is a reorganization of space, it's like space in a really global sense, I think. So this is Demoiselle de Brooklyn. So I try to use the titles to kind of bring in a little humor. And I really just took Demoiselle d'Avignon and reorganized it back into a kind of a kind of realist position, or a representational image. And, you know, there's this whole notion of this whole narrative of stealing, this idea of like European art stealing things from Africa and Asia, as another kind of a counter narrative, or a narrative that comes up, as for me as an artist and as an African American artist, and the question of whether or not that's true or what that really is interesting to me. But it's interesting that argument exists, and to what extent is there validity, and what extent is it another type of myth, and so you have these guys sort of coming down with their ski masks. And this is, did I forget the name of this painting? Oh, this is called The Curious Woman from Caucasus. And so I was thinking about war. She's wearing this sort of camouflage sort of burqa, and the black horse sort of representing kind of a war horse. These are all kind of time. These are all 2009, 2010, and they're also 24 by 24. These the last two. And tell me if I'm going too fast. I'm probably not. I don't think. This is called the painting lesson. It's actually, it's a shaped panel. And this one has a lot sort of going on in the borders. With, I don't know if you can kind of see some of the things that are in there, monkeys and plastic, trash bags and different. That's Japanese maple. It's not marijuana. Everybody asks me if it's marijuana. It can be, but it's Japanese. It's a Japanese maple. And pomegranate and beans and a number of things. And I was thinking, this is sort of taken from this image here of Josephine Baker. And some of us might not know Josephine Baker, but she was sort of a cabaret dancer, mostly in France throughout the 20s and 30s. And really interesting kind of figure. Not only does she kind of make this whole different sort of notion of sexuality for Black women at the time that we were sort of experiencing Jim Crow in this country, and sort of the most popular image then would have been like the sort of mammy image. That sort of at the time. So she kind of really rearranged that, but she did it in such a kind of perverse and subversive way of actually going further into this kind of jungle stereotype, which makes her a very interesting figure to me. That she's able to sort of turn that into this completely opposite thing. Turn the savage idea into this completely other thing. But she was a spy for France during World War II, and she's a philanthropist and an entrepreneur, and extremely wealthy at the time. A really very different existence for most African Americans at the time. So this painting is sort of thinking about Josephine Baker, and thinking about the notion of, I guess here, the masking, or it's like she's like turned herself into a type of abstraction in order to kind of find a place, or to find agency within the world she's living in. So for me, the masks and masking are all about that kind of doubling or disguising or becoming two things at once, or one thing being the same, making a rhyme between one thing being the same as the other. If you put on a Halloween mask, if you put on a Dracula mask, you're Dracula. You're also yourself. So here's I just put this Lubistal in just to show you the reference. So this painting's called Stocks and Bonds. And again, I guess this painting for me is the one that really maybe speaks more to this notion of a kind of existing sort of between a kind of past or a kind of notion of a lost past or cultural sort of ancestry and a kind of cool contemporary life and the kind of this kind of you know, for me as African American, this kind of feel you always kind of sort of feel that rub between those two things, you know, especially when we think about like you know, the recent events like Ferguson and Eric Gardner, and you think about, you know, this notion of the body or the black body as a kind of both as maybe so mythical in a sense that it's not real enough to kind of really register it as a, you know, so that these kind of atrocities we could kind of imagine that they happen, and it's totally a systemic thing in our society. But for me, this image speaks to kind of lots of different types of histories. And I just want to say implicating abstract painting in relationship to this is in no way me saying that I don't like abstract painting. I actually really love it. Some people get sensitive about these things. I have no idea why. And so in this world, everything's real, nothing's real, and everything's there to maybe antagonize. You know, the sort of cultural references there are there to kind of antagonize each other, to butt up against each other, to open up maybe a third space, to talk about a kind of in between space. And these are these just close-ups. I wanted you to kind of see these a little bit closer up, and maybe the surfaces. You can kind of see the blue is the velvety blue, so you can see it's like very textured. And these are a little blurry, so I don't even know. It could be my vision. I think I'm losing a little bit of that vision. These are, thank you. Yeah, so what's happening is most of the figures in these paintings are actually painted on paper and collaged in, and the borders, like I said, are flocked, so they have this kind of very shallow relief and texture, so that on the right-hand side, the big afro that's in front is very physical. It's about, you know, 1/8 of an inch thick foam, just like collaged on, and it's, you know, very plushy. So in front of these things, you have this very almost maybe dioramic kind of experience. And so these are the collages. I'm just going to maybe run through, getting towards the end here. These are these collages that I do that are now, I'll show some of these in the Skies exhibition in Seattle. They kind of came just from me looking at my subject matter and things that are around the studio and thinking that instead of just sort of having these things sit in a pile on my desk, to just sort of engage them somehow. You know, I like kind of economies and things, and, you know, trying not to let anything kind of go to waste. Or, and I don't know what would happen, but I figured if I put my hands on these things, maybe something would happen. Sometimes nothing happens, but you got to try. But these, I think, turned out to be these kind of interesting intersections and rhyming between, you know, African and Western art and influences. These, I should say before I go on, the idea is that this is maybe like a manuscript, and this is like a 2-page spread, and they're mounted on archival paper. And so I tried to be as simple as possible, by using the images, also trying to be as simple as possible and not trying to get too imagey with them, or too pictorial, I should say. And so these are smaller little portraits, I call them portraits, that are about 9 by 12. and really thinking about the ladybug, the nymphs in Western painting. So these are called nymphs, and they're numbered, and they're really exchanging. Each figure is sort of exchanging a gaze with the viewer and looking through this mask that is the masks that are sort of mimicking a lot, the sort of a long history of abstraction, I would say. And so back to these kind of collages, which really kind of maybe reflect a brain kind of situation that sort of makes me produce these paintings. And so this is Mondrian being abducted by a Dogon headdress, and you know, this sort of headdress, which is carried out in a kind of funerary, from what we know, is carried out in a sort of funerary ceremony, is a headdress in which sweeps a path between the living and the dead, allowing the spirit to pass over. And so and on the left hand side there, that's a star, a moon mask, and that's a Mondrian painting kind of stuck behind it there. You just see two lines. And again, this kind of visual rhyming that I see, not to pick on Mondrian, but it's interesting. These sort of cultural, these different cultural notions of geometry and what to do with geometry, and how to create with geometry. And then we got to get into the real stuff. See, she rose. And I had 3 sisters, and about 6 nieces. A very matriarchal sort of family. So these are definitely things that I consumed as a child. Most of the things I consumed were, since I'm like on the younger side, were things my older sisters wanted to watch. But I loved it. So we have, going clockwise. You got She-Ra from He-Man, and Storm from X-Men, and Sheena, which is really cool. She could do this thing, and then these developers are deforesting, and then she would call in the animals, and the animals would come in there and kick their ass, and they would run out of the forest. You see the monkeys and foul, and then everything was back to normal. And then the sorceress also from He-Man, and Beyond the Thunderdome with Tina Turner. And this is, so this is amazing too, because this talk about like this kind of clash of, what are they wearing? It's like it's so Creole, like I don't know who did the costume design, but it's so Creole in terms of like sort of cultural inflections with these warrior suits, that it really does feel like a whole different, society. You have no idea where these things come from. But this matriarch, which was a big thing in our house. This movie was like huge for me, for my family. And these are my sisters, and so this on the left-hand side is that's me in the really bad pants, and with on my sister Tina's lap, and my sister Lisa is there with her she really loved that cowboy hat, and that's Lisa up there with her 2 daughters on the right-hand top now, or within the past few years, and below that is my sister Tina's daughters. And then the bottom is my sister Stephanie. She's the youngest, so she didn't exist when we took that photo on the left, and her partner. And I have all my sisters with me. Thanks, guys.